very warm welcome everyone. Welcome back to the lecture series of Introduction to Environmental Economics. We've been talking about under this the topic of public goods and externalities. In the last we have been discussing about the excludability characteristic of good as well as bad. Here we talked about which goods and bads, how are they can be excludable, whether they can be excludable or non-excludable. We also talked about the legal aspect of excludability. The legal aspect of excludability can also apply to normal and ordinary goods. Without laws, protection of property and law of stealing, etc., all goods be open access and exclusion will not be possible then. So, legal system is an important framework, or you can say a backbone for deciding the excludability of cases which are not privately held, they are open access cases. Space also plays a very important role regarding the exclusion. Most of the non-excludable goods and bads are provided locally. For example, city parks, television and air pollution. These are all local issues and local open access cases. The consumer can effectively be excluded through the location, through the placement of his location. If a consumer can be prevented from living in a community, then the consumer will live elsewhere and effectively be excluded from the community's locally excludable goods. Suppose there is a community that has air pollution. It's a non-excludable good. But how can you make sure or provide exclusion in this case? This is how one can think of or implement. If consumer can be prevented from living in that community, then by using the space criteria, location, a person can be excluded. It will be too costly to travel to consume that particular good or bad entity if you are located far off distances. Finally, the basic point is that goods and bads may be locally non-excludable, though globally excludable. So, it is possible that a consumer, those particular goods are non-excludable in a local area, but they become excludable globally. For a price system to work, it is possible to take possession of good or bad for which the price is being paid. Without excludability, a price system cannot work. Now we move on to the next characteristic of a good or a bad, that is called as rivalry. Rivalry pertains to the manner in which a good is consumed. The act of consumption of bratwurst. Bratwurst is basically a sausage made of beef, and it destroys the good and makes it, the consumption of this particular sausage, it destroys the good and makes it unavailable for others, anyone else to consume. That act is called as rivalry. Basically, your act is leading to competition for that limited availability of a good. The act of consumption of a flower garden involves light bouncing off flowers and being transmitted to the eyes, the consumer. Now, this act of consumption of watching a flower garden is something different. It is a non-excludable. You are watching flower garden, but you cannot at the same time reduce the scene available for others to watch. This act is non-destructive to the flower garden and in no way diminishes the ability of a person or anyone to consume the flower garden in precisely the same way. A good is rival in consumption if the act of consumption reduces the amount of good that is available, that might be available for others to consume. A good is non-rival if the consumption does not diminish what is available for the other consumers. In contrast to exclusion criteria or characteristic, rivalry is not a characteristic of a good that might change with technology or cost. We had seen that in case of excludability, technology and the cost were the two basic factors which were determining excludability. The extent of excludability was dependent on the cost involved for exclusion as well as the technology used. Here in the case of rivalry, it is not so. It will not depend on change of technology or even the costs. A bratwurst, as we saw in the example, or a sausage, will always be rival since the nature of consumption will not change. Whatever be the price or the cost you attach to it, it will continue to reduce the amount that is available for the rest of the people to consume. Thus, rivalry is a more fundamental characteristic of a good or a bad than exclusion. It's a very important point to understand deeper that among among the two characteristics of a good or a bad, which is excludability and rivalry, it is the rivalry that is more fundamental characteristic because it does not change with time, with technology, or even with the cost. Let us consider the same examples and evaluate and examine in terms of rivalry. Let us take the old example of household garbage. This is an example of rival bad. Garbage, as we saw, is considered as bad. It is an example of rival bad. When one consumes a bag of garbage. What do you mean by consumption of bag of garbage? It means disposal of garbage. If one disposes the bag of garbage, one is taking control of that particular bag. When that bag is consumed or disposed of, it is unavailable for others to dispose. Thus, a standard garbage is considered as rival bad because it is reducing the amount for the rest of the people. Let us go to the next example, which we had earlier examined for the characteristic of excludability. Now we are examining it for the rivalry. Air pollution, which is again considered as a bad entity. Air pollution, on the other hand, is non-rival. If one takes a deep breath in downtown of London, by no way the quantity of bad, that is pollution, available for the others gets diminished. You are not reducing the pollution amount by breathing the bad air. My act of consumption does not diminish the quantity of the bad available for others. Here, the global climate threatened by the greenhouse gases is the purest example of non-rival good. You have to be carefully understanding this, that why it is a very important phenomena of global climate change, and it is for the discussion of geopolitical discussion, and it leads to lot of discourse and narratives on climate change, that whether it should be considered as a rival or a non-rival good. It is the purest form of non-rival good. One person's enjoyment of climate in no way impinges on the ability of others to enjoy the climate. So it is non-rival good. Your aesthetics of enjoying a particular climatic condition will not reduce the other person's enjoyment of climatic conditions. One way to view the notion of rivalry is through the opportunity cost. Here, rivalry is associated with opportunity cost, while in excludability we talked about prices, cost, compensation, technology, and rest of the other things, but in rivalry we will talk about the opportunity cost. And this is why, because it is reducing the quantity for others and it is influenced or affected by the limited supply. That is why we need to talk about opportunity cost associated with the characteristic of a good. When I consume bratwurst, I am reducing the number of bratwurst available for others, or maybe necessitating that another bratwurst be manufactured to reduce or to return to that area so that others can also avail it. So there is a need getting created of increasing the supply of bratwurst. So thus the consumption of bratwurst creates opportunity cost for others associated with my consumption. In contrast, when I consume flower garden, consuming flower garden basically means that you're enjoying the view of a flower garden. There is no social opportunity cost for others of that consumption. So the same amount of flower garden will be available for others to enjoy. No additional flowers needed to be planted for watching the view, because you have not taken away any flower from that flower garden view. When I breathe the air in downtown Mexico City, I am not changing the amount of pollution available for others. I am receiving that air inside me, but do not reduce the quantity of air pollution which can be exposed to the others. There is no opportunity cost, either positive or negative, attached to it or imposed on others because of my breathing. If, on the other hand, my breathing reduced the amount of pollution, then there would have been a negative social opportunity cost or an opportunity benefit, in fact, associated with my breathing the polluted air. This is the case of garbage consumption. Similarly, another bad example which we can take is the garbage. When I consume the bag of garbage, I diminish the amount of garbage everyone has to tolerate. So this quantity reduces. A bad, let us see the basic definition of rivalry now. A bad or a good is a rival if one person's consumption of a unit of a bad or a good diminishes the amount of bad or a good available for others associated with the consumption. A bad or a good is non-rival otherwise. If not so, then the bad or a good will be considered as non-rival if it is not diminishing the quantity available for the rest of the people. Let us take the case of congestion. A sparsely or limited populated rural highway is a non-rival in there is no opportunity cost associated with one additional person using the road. Once the traffic congestion sets in, then there becomes an opportunity cost of extra driver that enters the road, and the road is no longer for high levels of consumption available for the rest of the people. So one needs to see the scenario given to us. If it is a lighter road where there is hardly any vehicle, then that case opportunity cost associated is negligible. While the same road, when it becomes full with traffic, then there becomes opportunity cost is created with every additional driver in that on that road, as no longer the area or the space is available on the road for everyone. The typical reason for is indivisibility of the production, that is closely related to economies of scale. We cannot practically produce one person road. Suppose there was an additional driver entering the road in a congested area, then the supply side one needed one more road for that additional person. But however, the road infrastructure is indivisible. Roads by their very nature can handle a certain amount of traffic without becoming congested. Even if we could produce a one person road, suppose a very vague or an assumption or a scenario, if we take and visualize a condition when one person road can be constructed, it would have been almost the same price as many people road, because the cost of construction of the road will be same. It would be less desirable to provide many one person roads rather than a single multi person road. So, practically it is not viable. Rivalry is an important issue due to the problem of efficiency. If there is no cost associated with incremental use and if the price equals the marginal cost, the price should be 0. But with a price of 0, how can the revenue balance costs so that the good or bad is efficiently provided? Main problem of open access or public good or uh, all these type of goods externalities is that the price of 0, how can the revenue balance the costs? Similarly, we have another type of goods which are called as club goods. Club goods are those goods where excludability allows the formation of a club to provide the good. You only need it if you belong to the club and pay your dues. A local municipality that restricts the access to local public good either through parking restrictions or residency checks or simply by the fact of location. Such a good is considered as club good. Everyone within a reasonable distance of the good is a resident of that municipality and pays tax to the municipality. So, people belonging to that municipality or a community will be considered, all the facilities and goods provided within that region considered as club goods. Now, putting together the two concepts of excludability and rivalry together, let us see the degree of characteristic for each of the cases. We can classify goods on the basis of both the criteria. Any good you can pick up and try to fit in the characteristics, the degree of levels of degree or the extent of characteristics comprising with that particular good. The degree of rivalry is shown horizontally and degree of excludability as vertically. As you can see on this 3 by 3 table. So, in this matrix you can see that excludability is measured horizontally while rivalry is measured vertically. So, from first column to the second column, you are moving from rival to non-rival. Similarly, from the first row to the second row, you are moving from excludable to non-excludable. So, let us see the first case of private good. Private goods are both rival and excludable. All the goods you see in the market which have price, so it means that they are excludable. And all the goods which you find in the marketplaces, they are rival, because your consumption is going to reduce the quantity for rest of the people. But at the same time, club goods, which we recently discussed, are considered as excludable but at the same time non-rival. They are available for the whole of the community or municipality, but at the same time they can be excludable. If we move to the open access resources, we were talking about fishery, then we were talking about of local park area, which is open access resource. That was rival but at the same time non-excludable. But at the same time, another example would be the pure public good. So, when a good which is characterized as perfectly non-rival and perfectly non-excludable, it falls into the category of pure public good. So, pure public good, as you have seen, all railways, medical facilities, education, airports, all this infrastructure falls into the category of pure public good. They are non-rival, non-excludable. But there are many versions also. Now, the lower right corner of the table is for the goods that are non-rival and non-excludable. As we discussed, they are pure public good. Non-excludable goods creates a problem for using in the market. Non-rivalry suggests that a market would be undesirable. So, basically non-excludability and non-rivalry are the cases which are not reflected in the market, cannot be provided in the market, and they are undesirable for the market. Another classification of rivalry, characteristic of rivalry and excludability, can be evaluated or examined by these examples. So, a good private good such as bratwurst, which we just discussed, and a bad like household garbage, we can categorize both a good or a bad under this framework. Like you can see that pure rival and pure excludable are bratwurst and household garbage system. Then pure local public beach with the access control. Now, here you have to be very careful of the term access control. So, access control means that you have excluded them from use for certain people. So, that falls under the category of excludable but non-rival. Bad such as water pollution and in the small lake. And for the good like a fishery would become non-excludable but rival. Household garbage in Middle Ages was considered as rival but non-excludable, but now all the garbages are excludable. Good like natural defense or global climate are considered as non-rival and non-excludable, but a bad like greenhouse gases is considered as also non-excludable and non-rival. So, global climate and greenhouse gases are non-excludable and non-rival. Now, we can conclude the entire lecture that the lecture overviewed the concept related to the characteristic of the good, the concept of excludability was discussed, notion of rivalry was discussed at length, the concept of club good was introduced, and finally the goods were classified on the basis of degree of characteristics of excludability and rivalry. And this information and this lecture was based on the book Goldstitz 2011 Intermediate Environmental Economics. This is a book, standard book of environmental economics. So, thank you so much for listening to the lecture. Thank you so much. Have a great day.